It was back in February of this year that I did one of my very first scientific tests on my channel. It was between some Nanotech 1800 milliamp hour batteries and some Bolt 1800 milliamp hour batteries, both of them supplied by Hobby King. Thank you very much. And the test there was to determine if the Bolt batteries, which are high volts, performed better. At the time, high volts were relatively new on the market. Hard to believe it was only last February. It wasn't that long ago. I think they were relatively new on the market, and it was a lot of question as to whether high volts were just hype. Whether they really performed better, whether it was just marketing BS. And I put them through the ringer and concluded that they did perform better. And I said, should you buy high volt batteries? TLDR, yes. And then, of course, if you watch the whole video, you'll see that my conclusion was that they definitely did perform better. And I said that the only thing I couldn't comment on was their longevity. And that's just not something I was prepared and am prepared to really test. To really test a battery's longevity in a really methodical and scientific way would require a lot of equipment to run the batteries through charge cycles and make sure they were all going through the same charge cycles, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just don't have the time and equipment for that. And I still don't have the equipment to do that kind of testing. But what I do have is an ever more and more popular YouTube channel that puts me in contact with people all over the world who are telling me their experiences with various equipment, including high volt batteries. There's a saying in academia, in science, that the plural of anecdote is not data. And what that means is that just because you're hearing things doesn't necessarily mean that those things are reflective of any underlying truth. But the flip side is that, in a case where we don't have any data at all, maybe anecdotes are what we have to go on. And that's why I'm talking to you today. Back in February, I said that I couldn't make a judgment call about the longevity of high volt batteries. Today, I feel like I can. And in fact, I feel like I have to. Because in February, I said, you should buy these because they perform better. And they do perform better. But I think I am ready to go on record as saying that I don't think they last as long. And in fact, I think the longevity of high volt batteries is low enough that I'm not sure I recommend them anymore for general purpose use. Let me tell you some of the things that are leading me to that conclusion. It started, I think, with the Riva Electrics Blend 435, which was it was a spectacular performing battery in my battery testing. And when I was out in San Antonio with the Alamo City FPV Racing Club, those guys are hardcore racers, and they were telling me that they knew people who had those packs, and like 20 cycles later, those packs were puffed. I was like, okay. Now, if it was just anybody, I might think, well, maybe these people don't know what they're doing, maybe they abuse the battery, and certainly these guys abuse the batteries. And I said, come on, are you guys thrashing them? And they're like, yeah, well, I mean, we're racing, we're thrashing them, but we thrash all our batteries, and these ones are particularly fragile. And I thought, okay, well, the Riva Electrics is a spectacularly performing battery, even better than many other high volts. Maybe it's just particularly fragile. But then I started hearing stories about people buying bolts and having the same experience. And I thought, and I said to some of you in the comments, I know guys in Knoxville, I know one guy in Knoxville who has 15 bolts. He flies them. He hasn't complained, and I see him every weekend. And sure enough, a couple weekends later, the next time I saw him, I asked him, hey, how are your bolts doing? And he said, oh, dude, they're all puffed. And I was like, oh, well, there you go. But here's what was the final straw for me. It was my own personal experience. I can hear from here and I can hear from there, but until I have personal experience, that's what really puts the nail in it for me. About 2 months ago, I got a set of 10 Mad Dog batteries from 2Dog RC. And these, you may recall from my you probably don't recall from my testing, but I do. These were not the top performers in my testing, but they were pretty solid performers. And I like Mark at 2Dog RC. I like 2Dog RC as a company. I support them. And so I got some batteries from him. And they were 1300s and 1500s, and I've been flying them basically almost nothing but, for the last 2 months. I know what a battery feels like when it's done and ready to retire. I know the experience of having the battery sag you're only, a minute into the flight and it's already starting to sag. And don't forget that I fly with an OSD, so I'm always monitoring milliamp hours and resting voltage after a flight. So I always stop flying after a certain number of milliamp hours, but if I notice that before I hit that number of milliamp hours, the battery is sagging excessively, I'll land. And so there's two metrics for me as to when I'm done flying. And when a battery stops being able to hit the number of milliamp hours that I target before it's just sagging and sagging and sagging and I have to land, that's a sure sign that it's ready to be done. And these batteries are at that point. They're coming down slightly puffed after almost every flight, and I'm not thrashing the dickens out of them mostly. I haven't abused them. I always land. I never let the battery sag below 14.0 volts in flight, and I shoot for a resting voltage of about 15.0 volts. It's usually between 14.8 and 15.2 resting voltage when I'm done. And if it occasionally is lower than that, then I always put it back to storage pretty quickly. I almost never store them fully charged. I almost always store them at storage. I mean, these are not pristine batteries, but they're reasonably well taken care of. And the key thing is that I've had other batteries, standard LiPos, that I have treated exactly the same, and they have had a much longer service life. How long has the service life been? Well, I looked at the calendar recently, and it had been exactly 2 months since I got them. And it has not been a super busy 2 months of flying for me, because I've had work and I've had other projects I'm working on. I am not out there flying every day, but even if I was out there flying every day, 2 months, that's 60 packs, 60 cycles, right? And it's not even 30 cycles, because I haven't been flying every other day. I might have been flying as little, that might be 15 or 20 cycles, perhaps. I'd say it's more than 15, maybe more than 20, probably less than 30, and they're already showing significant wear, and almost to the point where, like, I wouldn't want to race on them because they're sagging that much. And I would typically pull about 1100 milliamp hours out of a 1300 or 1500 milliamp hour pack. 1500 you could pull a little bit more, but I just have that number in my brain because I typically fly 1300s. So I would usually land at about 1050 or 1100. The battery would come back to 15 volts, maybe 14.9, maybe 14.8, pretty close. Now I'm hitting 14 volts or 13.6 volts while I'm flying, and I'm just like, okay, I gotta land. And the batteries only pulled like 700 milliamp hours. These batteries are kind of done, and they have only at most 30 cycles on them. So back in February I said high volts perform very well, the only question is their longevity. And I now feel like I can weigh in and say that their longevity is 20 cycles, maybe. And if you're a hardcore racer and you want to spend $30 on a battery and thrash it really well, I mean, they do drop the amps, they really perform well, but they're not going to last. And so for general purpose, I think I can't recommend them anymore. So then the question obviously is, what do I recommend? And I would say I certainly could feel comfortable recommending a high quality standard LiPo. When I talked to the guy over at SMC for my last round of battery testing, he sent a battery, his 45 amp true spec battery, and I said, how come you don't have any high volts on your lineup? Aren't there? They're really good performers. And he said, I don't feel like the quality of the high volt batteries is there. I don't feel like the longevity is there. Turns out maybe he was right. And he said, I think what I want to sell is a really high quality standard LiPo. So I think that if you're going to shop around for a battery that will give you maybe 50 or 75 cycles instead of closer to 30 cycles, then a really good high quality standard LiPo may be the direction to go. The other thing that I think is worth looking into, and I don't have enough data to say this with any authority, but I want to throw it out there and you can take it for what it's worth, is it's worth looking into graphene batteries. The Infinity 1500 graphene was a spectacular performer in my last round of testing, and one of the hypothetical benefits of graphene batteries is that they last longer, that they have a longer cycle life. And people who fly these batteries they anecdotally report that they are very robust batteries, that they have very little voltage sag, and that they have a good cycle life. So certainly something to look into. The Turnigy graphene, or perhaps the Infinity graphene, although the Infinity graphene's amp rating was suspiciously good. I'm not sure what's going on there. For those of you who are into racing, I've also heard some argument that a graphene is a better battery for racing than a high volt. A high volt does dump a lot of amps, especially at the beginning of the charge cycle where it has those additional volts, and so it can produce additional watts. And my testing has shown that the high volts also perform better, towards the end of the cycle as well, although they're more of an advantage at the beginning. But some racers have suggested that the ability of a graphene to hold charge without sagging as much, and in fact some people have problems with graphenes because the graphene, it doesn't sag like a regular battery does, and then you'll hit the end of the battery and it'll just go zoom, and then you'll just be done and you'll crash. You really got to pay attention. You can't wait for the throttle to get a little soft. They say that a graphene's ability to hold charge without sagging is actually better for racing than a high volt. The graphene may not dump as many amps, but it will deliver watts more consistently, and that may be better for racing. So there you go. That's what I got to say. I feel a little bit, I wish I had a crystal ball I could have looked into 6 months ago and told you what I know today. But of course I didn't. I can only give you the data that I've got, give you the caveats, and let you make your own decisions. But I am always paying attention and trying to keep my eye out for things I need to correct, and I feel like this is one of them. If you are interested in buying a battery that may not have a strong cycle life and will have high performance, a high volt is potentially a good choice. If you are a general flyer, I would suggest that your money is probably better spent buying a high quality standard LiPo or a graphene. What about buying high volts and not charging them to 4.35? Well, I don't think there's any debate that would extend their lifespan, but I have no real opinion on how the performance would be compared to a standard LiPo charged to 4.2 or a high volt charged to 4. I don't know how that would all break down. I would say that there are some cases, I'm positive, there are some cases on the market where high volt LiPos are just standard LiPos that the manufacturer feels is safe to allow you to overcharge without a risk of damage. I do think that there are batteries that are specifically designed to be overcharged to 4.35, and I suspect that those batteries probably give up something else in their construction in order to allow them to be safely overcharged. So if you don't intend to overcharge them, I don't think there's really a benefit to buying them. Alright, well that's where I'm going to sign off. In February of this year I said, should you buy high volt batteries? TLDR, yes. And now I say, should you buy high volt batteries? TLDR, probably not. There you go. Happy flying.